Every spring, millions of people dump last year's potting soil in the trash, drive to the store and buy a fresh bag of the same thing they just threw away. That bag runs anywhere from $6 to $16 depending on the size, and if you've got more than a few pots, that adds up to real money, spent every single year on dirt. But that old soil sitting in your pots right now isn't dead. It's just missing 3 things, and none of them cost anywhere close to a fresh bag. Here's what that old soil actually looks like by the end of a season. Compacted, almost brick-like when it's dry. Roots tangled through it from whatever grew there last. Maybe a few rocks or debris that worked their way in over the summer. It smells a little flat. Not rotten exactly, just tired. Most people look at that and assume it's finished, used up, only fit for the trash. It isn't. Everything that plant pulled out of that soil was nutrients, not the soil structure itself. The dirt is still there. It's just hungry. Flip a bag of Miracle-Gro potting mix over and the ingredient list gives away the whole secret. Peat moss, compost, perlite, a slow-release fertilizer, and sometimes earthworm castings. That's it. That's the entire formula you're paying $6 to $16 for. And here's the part worth sitting with. Your old soil already contains the peat moss and organic base, since that's the majority of what any potting mix even is. You're not missing the expensive part. You're missing the cheap part. Before anything else, dry the old soil out completely. A couple of hot sunny days on a tarp does it, since dry soil is dramatically easier to work with than wet, clumping dirt. Once it's dry, break it apart by hand, right in a wheelbarrow, a bucket, or straight on the tarp. You're pulling out old roots, rocks, and any debris that doesn't belong. You don't need an actual sieve. Your hands do the job fine, crumbling clumps as you go. Give it a smell test once it's broken up. It should smell like plain earth, not sour or not rotten. If it smells off, or if whatever grew in it last was visibly diseased, that batch goes in the compost pile instead, not back into a pot. That one rule matters more than any ratio that comes after it. Once you've got clean, sifted soil, you're rebuilding exactly what that bag from the store sells you, just without the markup. First, compost. Mix in roughly 20 to 30% by volume. This is the single most important addition, since compost brings back the organic matter and slow-release nutrients that last season's plant already used up. If your town offers free compost, which plenty do, this step can cost you literally nothing. Second, perlite. This is the one ingredient most people have never heard of, even though it's sitting in every bag of store-bought mix. Perlite is naturally occurring volcanic glass that gets heated until it expands into small, lightweight, porous white pebbles. It weighs almost nothing, and its entire job is to keep the soil from compacting back down, holding tiny air pockets open so roots and water can actually move through the mix instead of hitting a wall of dense packed dirt. Mix in perlite at around 10 to 20% by volume, more if the soil you're reviving was on the heavier, denser side to begin with. Third, a slow-release fertilizer. A modest amount worked into the mix now covers the base nutrient needs for whatever goes in next, and you can always feed heavy feeders like tomatoes or peppers more directly once they're planted in their final spot. Here's something worth knowing before you settle on ratios, because even experienced gardeners don't fully agree on this. Some recommend keeping the mix mostly old soil, around 70%, with 20 to 30% compost and a light hand with fertilizer. Others push much further, using only half old soil, with 30% compost and a full 20% perlite for badly compacted mixes. The truth is, both are right, just for different starting soil. If your old soil is only lightly used and still crumbles easily, lean toward the gentler ratio. If it came out of the pot practically like a brick, lean toward the heavier compost and perlite mix. There's no single perfect recipe here, only a starting point you adjust based on what you're actually holding in your hands. There's a simple test that settles the argument for you, without needing to guess. Take a handful of the dry, sifted soil and squeeze it. If it holds together in a tight, dense clump that barely crumbles when you poke it, that's compacted soil, and it needs the heavier hand, more compost, more perlite. If it falls apart loosely in your palm with barely any pressure, it's already closer to workable, and the gentler ratio is enough. This one squeeze tells you more than any fixed recipe ever could, because no two pots of old soil ever break down exactly the same way, even from the same bag of mix a year earlier. It's also worth thinking about what grew there last, not just how the soil feels. Heavy feeders like tomatoes, peppers, and squash strip a pot of nutrients far more aggressively over a season than something like lavender or a light annual flower. Soil that fed a hungry vegetable all summer needs more rebuilding than soil that just held a low-maintenance houseplant on a windowsill. Matching your ratio to what actually grew there, not just to how the dirt looks, gets you closer to right on the first try instead of guessing twice. Before you use any of this, moisten it. Peat-based mixes are naturally water repellent once they've fully dried out, so soil that looks ready to plant can actually shed water right off the surface the first time you try to use it. A light watering the day before planting, enough to dampen it evenly without soaking it, fixes that completely. Here's the part worth saying plainly because it matters more than the recipe itself. This method is not for starting seeds. Seedlings are far more sensitive to lingering pathogens and uneven texture than an established plant. So give them a fresh, sterile seed-starting mix instead, every time, no exceptions. And soil that grew something visibly diseased doesn't belong back in a pot at all. Compost it, or use it to fill a low spot in the yard, but don't gamble a new plant on it. Rotating what you grow in revived soil also matters. If a pot grew tomatoes last year, plant something from a different family this year. Flowers, herbs, anything unrelated, since that simple swap keeps pest and disease cycles from building up season after season the way they can when you replant the same crop in the same soil year after year. Container-grown perennials, things you plan to keep in the same pot for several years rather than replanting annually, are also a case where starting fresh matters more. Revived soil is excellent for this year's annuals and vegetables, but a shrub or perennial that's going to sit in one pot for 3 or 4 years benefits from a cleaner base with fewer unknowns working against it long term. Add it up honestly. A bag of fresh potting mix runs $6 to $16, and most people with more than a handful of pots go through several bags every single spring. Reviving old soil costs the price of a small bag of perlite, maybe a bag of fertilizer that lasts multiple seasons, and compost that many towns give away for free. Over several years of container gardening, that's the difference between an annual grocery store expense and something closer to walking out to your own backyard. Multiply that by 5, 10, or 20 pots, which isn't unusual for anyone with a real container garden going, and the yearly bag total stops looking like a small convenience purchase and starts looking like a subscription you never actually signed up for. So the next time you're about to tip last year's soil into the trash, remember that the bag you're about to buy to replace it is mostly made of the exact same thing you're throwing away. The dirt was never the problem. It just needed 3 cheap ingredients and a few minutes of your time instead of a trip to the store. So tell me, how many pots did you empty out this year, and did any of that old soil end up in the trash? And if you try reviving it, are you going lighter on the compost or going all in on the heavier mix? Drop it in the comments.